All right, today we're going to take a quick look at finding and calculating discounts and markups. So if anything, these are super helpful to use because I use them every day when I'm figuring out sale prices and things like that. So a discount or a markup is just used because stores frequently discount or markup items. So when we think about a markup is when something is added to the additional price. So if you think about it, a store has to buy the product and then they're going to do a certain markup so that they're actually making money on that product. And then a discount is just the opposite of that. That's when something is subtracted. And a lot of times we see that when stores are trying to get rid of product or to entice you to buy other stuff. So the interesting thing too is to think about a lot of times when objects are discounted, if you know the actual price that the store bought it, a lot of times they're still making a profit. It's just less than they would be normally because they don't want to be selling items at a loss because then they're losing money. All right. So, and then once you do that, basically you're figuring out what the selling price is because that's what the customer ends up paying. So in the case of a markup, it's the price after the markup. In the case of a discount, it's the price after the discount. We talked briefly about using that 10% rule. So if you think about the 10%, mentally you can do this really nicely because we can just divide by 10 or move the decimal one place to the left. And then you can use that 10% accordingly. So if it was like a 15%, you could then cut that in half. If it's a 20%, you would double it, and so on. So for example, on this tablet where it's $492 and it's 20% discount, what we can do is we can figure out that 10% would be $49.20 because I took that decimal point and I just moved it one spot to the left. And then 20% is just doubling that. So if I double 49.20, it ends up being 98.40. And then because it's a discount, we can take the 492 minus the 98.40 to get our sale price. So the discount was 98.40, and then the selling price ends up being $393.60. So that's one way you can do it with mental math. The other way you can do it is kind of using the percent equation, which we worked on last class. So for example here, if we jump down to this markup. So number 5, we're selling a wedding dress for $625. It's a 3% markup. Especially because that 3% isn't as nice to work with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 625, I'm going to multiply it by that 3% markup, but it's going to be as a decimal. So in this particular problem, the markup on the wedding dress is only $18.75. And so because it's a markup, we would then take 625 plus 1875 to get the selling price, which ends up being $643.75. To do one with a discount really quickly, right? If we have a microwave, it's 5% off. Same thing, I'm going to do $89.99. I'm going to multiply that by 5% as a decimal, which ends up being $4.50. So that is our discount. And then the selling price, right, is just the $89.99 minus our discount of $4.50. So our selling price ends up being $85.49. So that's the gist of markup and discounts. I use the mental one, especially when I'm shopping, just because I can really quickly calculate how much I'm saving off an item. The markup is more so just in case, like if you had your own business and you were looking at what that kind of looks like. All right, the other part where we are typically looking at this kind of thing is thinking about sales tax or tip, which works a lot of the same way. Both sales tax and tip end up being added to the price or the bill. Sales tax is money that then goes to the state. Tip is something that in addition that you were given for a service. So let's just really quickly look at an example with sales tax. Like I said, tip is going to work largely the same way. So say we were buying a laptop for $849.99 and it's a 6% sales tax. So just like we were doing before, I'm going to use that percent equation. So I'm going to do $849.99 times my sales tax as a decimal. Now you technically could use the percent proportion. It would work the same way. So it's kind of a personal preference. I tend to use the percent equation, but do what works best. This ends up being $51 is our tax. And because it's a sales tax, we end up paying that in addition to our price. So we're going to add that $51. So our final selling price would be $900.99. So just to see that with the percent proportion, you could do X over 849.99 is equal to 6 over 100, and then you could do your cross products, and it would work the same way. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Don't hesitate to reach out, but that is sales tax and discount on top of markups and things like that.